Welcome aboard.
Ben DuBose here, Paulo Alves there. Welcome into another episode of the Rockets Launch Pod, presented by Clutch Fans, and also with support from Sports Talk 790, official flagship radio station of your Houston Rockets. It's Sunday, October 19th, about 48 hours before the Rockets open up their regular season at Oklahoma City on Tuesday night. And we will talk a little bit of basketball before tonight's pod ends, but we're going to be talking mostly business on today's show, and that's because Monday is a pretty big date and a key inflection point on the NBA calendar each year. So the way it works is on the day before the regular season opener, which this year is Tuesday, and the Rockets are part of that playing in Oklahoma City's ring that game, rosters have to be finalized around the league, and there's also a rookie scale contract extension deadline for first-round draft picks who are now entering their fourth seasons in the league. And if they don't agree to an extension by that time, then they become a restricted free agent the next summer. There's no further negotiations. That's just the way the system is set up. So here in Houston, we all know the story. The 2022 first-round picks were Jabari Smith Jr. and Tari Eason, and Jabari already agreed to his extension months ago. Tari is a bit trickier for reasons we documented in the past in terms of projecting the future value, because some of the risk-reward considerations are fairly unique with regards to his injury history, his unique playing style, and so I think that's why those negotiations have taken a bit longer. But in addition to that, and this is also something that we touched on in previous episodes, the Tari negotiations were also kind of connected to the ongoing talks with Kevin Durant over a veteran extension. Because in this new CBA landscape where you need to stay below the second apron of the luxury tax, all the deals are sort of interconnected because it's like fitting together a puzzle. Now, I've argued in the past it's possible that Jabari's deal was tied to Kevin as well, but I think for a different reason, in that for the Rockets to feel secure that Jabari and not Jalen Green was the young guy to keep moving forward, then the Rockets needed to understand where his deal would come in at. And so it wouldn't surprise me if that was something that came up during the June negotiation between the Rockets and the Suns. That's not confirmed. That's my speculation, but longtime listeners know where I'm coming from on that. Anyway, flash forward to today, and Sunday morning news broke that KD would be signing a 2-year, $90 million extension to stay with the Rockets. That's for 2 years after this season. His deal for 25-26 is already on the books. So technically, he's now under contract with the Rockets for the next 3 seasons, although the last year is a player option. That's the 27-28 league year. And then the $90 million figure, that's roughly $32 million under what the max contract would have been, which was at $122 million over 2 years. And by the way, I'm going to pat myself on the back because we came pretty close to nailing the terms on this very podcast. I went back and listened to our August show where we talked about a KD extension. We also had a show on a potential Tari extension. And with Kevin, we mentioned 2 for 100 or 2 for 80 as potential parameters if he was going to give something of a hometown discount, which had been reported by ESPN's Shams Charania, who, to no surprise, broke the news Sunday of the actual deal being reached. And then 2 for 90 is basically Rafael Stone and KD just splitting the difference there. But the more important takeaway, as far as the overall puzzle, the bigger picture, all that good stuff, KD is now coming in at about $45 million in annual value, and that gives the Rockets about $25 million in space next off season below the second apron, which can potentially be used on some combination of Tari Eason, and then maybe having enough money left over that you can use some or all of the taxpayer mid-level exception, which I believe has a starting salary of about $6 million or so. Now, I want to reiterate that as of our recording on Sunday evening, the 19th, and I'm also not doing much editing, by the way, because we want to get this live ASAP because of how timely all of this is. And it could be that by the time we actually upload this, a Tari deal is officially in, or by the time you're listening to it. As of our recording time, it's not, so we're just guessing right now. But I do think it's fair to conclude that the Durant deal gives the Rockets enough wiggle room to where a Tari extension is very doable. And obviously that would mitigate a lot of the uncertainty and the risk for, honestly, both the team and the player. And given the fact that Tari hasn't gotten his first big contract yet, he's had the obvious injury history, and also the Rockets just need firm figures so that they can plan out their future payrolls as this team gets more expensive. That's been well documented. The bottom line is there's a lot of incentive for both sides to get this resolved without waiting until next offseason. And now that the KD contract has officially come in at something of a discount, you've got both incentive and opportunity. And while we still don't know the specific value or years as of our recording time, we'll talk about that in a future episode once the terms are in. The bigger takeaway here is that it does look like a deal is getting done. David Aldridge and Will Guillory of The Athletic, they reported earlier Sunday that a deal between Tari and the Rockets is expected to be completed by the deadline, which is officially at 5 p.m. Central on Monday afternoon. So those are the general parameters. Paulo, let's just start with the obvious. What was your immediate reaction to the news of the KD extension and ultimately what it means in the bigger picture?
I thought it was unbelievable. I know we talked about KD taking a pay cut, and it was widely reported that he would. But in my head, there was always, okay, if you get a deal done with Tari, KD gets whatever's left, considering that it would always have to be above a certain level, of course. So it came kind of as a surprise for two reasons. First, because of the number itself. I know we talked about those kinds of numbers, but to me, it always felt a bit too optimistic to look at anybody at anything under 100 million. Guys take big pay cuts. That's been a thing. It's still rare, but pay cuts of 16 million a year, I think it's pretty unprecedented. Unless it is to bring on another star. Like KD is doing this without knowing what this flexibility is going to turn into in the future. I mean, when you speak of KD, it's always rough. So it's always hard to talk about KD and not talk about Steph. Go look at how much Steph Curry is making, and he had perhaps even more of a responsibility to, take a hometown discount than what KD would have with a completely new team. I'll get into that part later, but my first takeaway was it's interesting that it has come out before the Tari Eason news has come out. Unless they already, I never know why these extensions take until the last second, especially, with the Rockets they have in recent memory. But perhaps they already kind of know what the deal is going to be with Tari, and they're just, waiting until the last second to make sure that there's no deal signed in the meantime that completely break precedent and that would kind of throw a wrench in negotiations. I don't think Kamara obviously is a similar archetype to Tari. He just signed for something like 4 years, 80 million, although one of those years goes from being a minimum team option to whatever the 20 million a year AD is. I don't think that's going to change much, but I do think it's interesting that they released or at least made public the KD extension before the Tari Eason one, because if the goal was to extract maximum value from a Tari deal, you'd probably be better off announcing the KD deal after the Tari Eason one, because, well, there's no deadline, so you could have. And second of all, you've kind of tipped your hand as far as, now Tari's agent knows how much money you're working with for next season, right? The fact that they didn't, and this is obviously not something that Rafael Stone, Eli White in the front office would, overlook, makes me think that the deal's already basically set in stone. And for some reason, like with Sengun and Jalen Green last year, it just hasn't been signed for whatever reason. Because otherwise, I think they would have waited, because there would be no, or at least I can't see any downside in waiting until after Tari Eason's deal's done to walk in the KD deal. But besides that, going into the actual number, I think KD is probably being a little bit overpaid here. I don't think he should make a nickel over what OG Anunoby is making, because he's clearly a superior player. So I think the Rockets overpaid him by about $2.5 million a year still, even with the pay. I'm kidding, guys. Please nobody clip that. Please nobody clip that out of context. I'm going to get flamed. No, obviously it's a massive bargain for the opposite of what I was just telling you. If OG Anunoby is making 2.5 million less than Kevin Durant, I think that tells you everything you need to know. I mean, all respects to OG Anunoby as a player, but he's a role player, and KD is a top 10 player in the league. So I think that tells you everything you need to know. And it kind of reinforces a point that we had tried to get across just from very early on, before KD was even a Rocket, which is, if KD was ever going to be a Rocket, it would always be because he's just a guy that understands basketball from a playing standpoint and from a business standpoint, and understands what it takes to win. And that sometimes he's just very savvy. He picked the Rockets. Before he came here, we always said, if he picks the Rockets, or it's realistic that he might pick the Rockets, because it's the situation that makes the most sense out of the options that he has, even from a competing standpoint, right? It's a team that's already built, it's young, it can make up for whatever possible shortcomings he may have as he gets older, team that can bring all of that energy, and a team that desperately needs exactly what he brings. And we always kind of highlighted that KD understood how much sense it made for him to come to the Rockets because of how well he fit into what the team needed. And I think this just, just doubles down on all we were saying back then, which is, well, KD understands as well, besides the on-court basketball perspective, which obviously he's a perfect fit. From a team building perspective, he also understands that at this point in his career, you know, and this is obviously not to downplay the generosity that he's shown, those 15 million will allow the Rockets to be a lot more competitive over the 3 years that he is here. And he has talked about extensively about the goal being to win a championship here and to have his jersey retired. And it's not easy to have your jersey retired with a franchise when you only play 3 years there unless you win 3 championships. Taking this pay cut shows how committed he is to, being ingratiated, I guess, by Rockets fans and how, he is committed to this is not his retirement home. Like, he is here to do the best that he possibly can to bring success to the team and to have one more place in his career. The way to believe he has another one where he is kind of a hero to the fans of the team, right? He obviously left OKC in a little bit of a rough situation. Didn't leave the Warriors, especially on good terms. I mean, we can tell that he didn't want to go back there. Didn't leave Brooklyn. He kind of left on good terms, but then didn't leave Phoenix on good terms at all. And I think this shows his commitment to, okay, I want a franchise that I can call home, and I want to do everything so that the team that I'm at has the best situation possible to win within reason. Obviously, he wasn't going to take a minimum deal. That's absurd. But a $30 million pay cut, a $32 million pay cut over 2 years is massive. And it shows how committed he is and has immediate implication on the Tari Eason deal, because now the Rockets can go up to $25 million a year to retain Tari on next season, which is probably going to be above what the AAV is for Tari, but might allow the Rockets to do something more creative, like either start Tari's deal on the typical contract structure where he starts at a lower salary and progresses year over year with the 8% raises, which might allow the Rockets, as you said, to sign an MLE guy, or it might allow the Rockets to make the team more sustainable while KD is here by starting with, making the deal front loaded and perhaps starting at those 25 million. But by the time a Man Thompson's extension kicks in, that figure might be lower than it would have been if you had to taken every penny that you could get. And it kind of allows the Rockets to eat more of that salary early on and have Tari's contract be cheaper later on, which might allow the Rockets to have, more, and will allow the Rockets to have more flexibility once Amen Thompson gets his max extension paid. Not only the practical benefits that come from that flexibility, it's also about the message that and I'll leave that up to you because you were with the guys today and you got some live reactions to it, but the message that it relays to all of the young guys that are, starting to get their first week contracts, that the guy you looked up to your entire career just took a massive pay cut to extend his contract. And the fact that he came here and it's year one, he hasn't played the game in a Houston Rockets uniform, and he's already sacrificing for that culture. And he's talked about that culture in other situations, but the message that relays amongst the young guys, obviously Shane Gun took a pay cut from what the max that he could have gotten. I think Jabari Smith on a pretty team-friendly deal. I think Fred VanVleet before the injury was on a pretty team-friendly deal as well. I think Steven Adams is on a team-friendly deal as well. I think Dorian Finney-Smith, well, we don't know what the injury looks like to 100%, but I think that his was a team-friendly deal as well. And I think that just, keeps that theme going from a guy that is his first year here. He doesn't owe anything to the franchise, right? But he still decided that he was going to make a decision that's incredibly selfless. 30 million in over 2 years is a lot of money, even for Kevin Durant.
Yeah, and that's something that Ime Udoka said when he spoke to us at practice after the KD deal was officially announced, his words, it shows their selflessness, talking about not just Kevin, but other veterans, most notably Fred VanVleet going down from a $45 million salary to 25. And I know he got hurt, but obviously they did not know that at the time. And then you mentioned Steven Adams and Dorian Finney-Smith. I think they took pretty team-friendly deals as well. And so Ime continued his comments. They're about the basketball. I think a lot of these guys are about the right things. It's about winning and whatever it takes to get there. They understand that flexibility matters, and it puts us in a good spot when there's extra money to go around. Speaking specifically to the vets, he said they see the big picture and the value of our depth. And what Ime is referring to in that is that by having a deep bench and young players who are capable of taking on bigger roles and sliding up if need be, then it can keep the veterans fresher to where they have the best opportunity overall to achieve their goals. And I think ultimately that's part of why they leaked the Kevin Durant deal first. I mean, I think I agree with you, Paulo, that the parameters of a Tari deal are probably in place. I think that's why The Athletic is reporting that a deal is expected to get done. I'm thinking that I don't know if it's the team side, the player side, or both. There's clearly some confidence, and it's just, dotting the I's and crossing the T's at this point. But I also think that if Kevin freaking Durant, a guy of his stature, is taking that type of discount, and Fred VanVleet, president of the Players Union now, if guys of that stature in the league are taking discounts, how does that not set a tone for everyone else on the roster? Because as you mentioned, it's really not just the veterans. I think they probably set a tone, and maybe that's why you leaked the Kevin deal first, because it's so massive. It's Kevin Durant. I guess he deserves his own day in the spotlight, if you will. But I also think it sort of continues the theme to where everybody feels like they want to fall in line. And it's about the collective rather than any one person, individual, or any one set of negotiations. It's about winning at a high level, and that takes sacrifice, not just on the court, but off the court as well. And so I think a deal is probably in place. And even if it's not, you could also argue that with $25 million worth of space beneath the second apron next offseason, there's no way that Tari is going to get a higher AAV than Jabari. So there's enough room no matter what. In my opinion, at this point, it's largely just about figuring out if there's enough of a delta to where you can have the full taxpayer MLE as well. That's my guess. But regardless, there is enough room to get a deal done. And I mean, theoretically, you could wait until restricted free agency as well, and I think still be in a good spot. But it doesn't seem to me that that's the way this is trending. But I just think the bigger takeaway here, there's just not much downside, because if you see Kevin Durant doing this for the benefit of the team after all he has achieved, how does it not make you, when you're his teammate and you look up to him, perhaps be more amenable to sacrifices on your end? I don't think it's necessarily a coincidence that the Jabari deal got done. Now, it might be in part because of the Kevin Durant trade, but earlier that month, the Rockets agreed to those sweetheart deals that you mentioned with Steven Adams and Fred VanVleet, who I think both took salaries that are well below their contributions last season. So if you're a young guy and you see your teammates doing things like that for the betterment of the team, how does that not make you think along those same lines? I guess that's my take. I'm not necessarily disagreeing with you, because I do, if I had to bet, the parameters are already in place. But I also think it's just the Rockets love having this headline, this storyline out there. And I think ultimately that's the big takeaway here, is that it's about the culture, and, really it's about Ime Udoka and the way things have trended since he took over this program in 2023. I think that's the real takeaway here, is that even if there's still some I's to dot and T's to cross, there's just no real downside when the headline is Kevin Durant taking $32 million less, right?
Yeah, and it's not the first time that the Rockets have allowed the media narrative to be, or to have the spotlight be on the player or the agent. The Rockets don't really. I think they've shown this with Fred VanVleet back with the entire 30-year team auction that only became public a day later. The Rockets have always shown a willingness to let the media narrative favor anybody else other than the front office. They've never made it a point to make it look like they're fleecing anybody, and they've never made it a point to make it look like they're an excellent front office. They've always tried to use that as kind of a little bit as leverage. They've always let the agents and the players take or kind of squeeze out of every move all that they can get for their own purposes. from a narrative perspective, because what the Rockets have always cared more about, I think that the Rock Boston, that's always been the case, is what's actually, the actual terms of the contract. They don't care how you spin it to the media. They care about getting the best terms possible. If they can get a contract to be $10 cheaper, and in exchange you get to write, the report for Shams and have him publish it, they'll allow you to do it anyway. And I think that's a really good point from you, which is, and I think KB is someone who will care about the good publicity. That perhaps they let it come first because, well, it being a single news kind of event gets more good publicity for KD than it would if both of them came at the same time. And I think it makes even more sense when you consider when the news broke out. Because the news came very early on, and it was the only thing that came on from an NBA perspective as far as news goes.
It was 8 a.m. on the dot that the news broke, which, by the way, whenever something is on the dot, I always think that it was planned in advance. Like someone might have had it in their drafts and just scheduled it for that time. And so that way it gets to be a talking point on all the Sunday morning shows, Sports Center. It sort of drives the dialogue for the day. And you woke me up because, of course, that's what, like 2 p.m. for you. But yeah, Danielle Lerner, the beat writer for the Chronicle, I saw her tweet out later that she was sleeping in and she was playing catch up because she woke up about 10. Actually, thanks to you, Paulo, I was on top of it right when it broke out because I had this buzz and I looked at my phone. I was like, holy shit. Which 8 a.m. is not typically a time that news breaks, but I guess when you think about it, yeah, it does let him sort of dominate the day, the news cycle, and it's sort of fitting because if you recall, his trade to Houston was also announced on a Sunday morning. That time, it was about 11 a.m. Houston time. All right, so let's transition to on-court discussion. I'm not going to gloss over the Tari Eason contract as far as a discussion on this podcast, but we're going to save it for a future episode because there's no point in going too far in the weeds as far as how much money, how many years, when we're about to find out, and hell, we might find out within an hour or two of when this episode gets posted. So we'll come back to Tari later this week if a deal gets done. And if for some reason it doesn't, then we can look at the reports, try and decipher where things went wrong, and maybe give a little bit of an early look ahead to the restricted free agency market in 2026. I doubt that will be the case, but the bottom line, it doesn't feel prudent to go too far down the road speculating about Tari figures when I think we're a few hours, worst case, about 20 hours from finding out what the terms actually are, and we can talk about the implications of those once they're in. So to wind down this episode, I want to look at what we saw on the floor in the final week of preseason, and specifically, I think the debate for Ime Udoka entering the first few games of this season. We mentioned Tuesday night against the Thunder on the road, and then the home opener Friday against Detroit should be a very good team in the Eastern Conference led by Cade Cunningham. The big decision for Ime Udoka, and he has not tipped his hand just yet, is who the fifth starter is going to be. Obviously, KD, Şengün, Amen, and Jabari are locked in, and they've left the door open to it being Reed Sheppard, Steven Adams, or Tari Eason as the fifth starter. I think at this point it's more likely to be Reed or Steven because the only game in the preseason slate that Tari started was the opener that KD started. He came off the bench. In the others, we heard Josh Okogie refer to him as a potential sixth man of the year. So I think the evidence that we've seen points to Tari being the sixth man, versatile, can fill a number of plugs, or if there's foul trouble, can plug a number of holes, I should say. And then with Reed and Steven, it just comes down to the archetype. Do you want the traditional point guard that's in the Fred VanVleet body, or do you want to go double big and the high floor that I think Steven Adams provides? In that sense, he might be a good replacement for the Fred archetype in that Fred is a very different style of player, but he does have a very high floor, and that's something that the Rockets might need when you look at the high upside of certainly the big three, but also Jabari is a third overall pick from a couple of years ago as well, and Jabari obviously had a great preseason. So there's multiple ways that you could look at it, but I think that's the big debate for Ime Udoka, and he has said that it might not be a permanent thing. He could change it depending on the matchup, and he also might be trying to buy time until Dorian Finney-Smith comes back. We don't have a firm timetable just yet, but I don't think it's going to be too long. We have seen him at training camp. It's not like he's in hiding. No, he is running. He is doing some drills. Jayshawn Tate had the same offseason ankle injury, and it looks like he will be cleared and available on opening night. So that should be a positive sign, in my opinion, that with Dorian Finney-Smith, unless there's a setback, and we have not been told of that, then it probably shouldn't be too much longer. And so Dorian is someone that could certainly figure into the equation as well if the Rockets start off sluggishly defensively. And as far as, the trends, we talked about them on the last episode. This is a team that should have more of an offensive identity. In the preseason, they led the league in points per game, in offensive rating. Defensively, you lost Dylan Brooks and Fred VanVleet from last year's team. Jalen Green, I know he, catches a lot of criticism, especially after being traded away. But in terms of stop and dribble penetration, which was at times an issue in the preseason, he was one of your shiftiest guys outside of Amen Thompson when it comes to perimeter defense. So with defense, the hope is that playing harder in the regular season will take away some of the spotty things that we saw in the preseason, but time will tell. And if it doesn't, then you do have Dorian Finney-Smith coming back in the relatively near future. That should help a lot as well. A very versatile and good defensive player for some time, and one that should be a lot healthier than what we saw the last couple of years based on getting his ankle cleaned up. So as good as he was defensively the last couple of years, just imagine how good he can be once he has more freedom of movement. So defensively, I think we'll just have to be patient, wait and see. And, I don't know if they'll be quite as good as they were a year ago, but obviously they don't have to be. And then offensively, well, because offensively they're just so much better and they have a gear that last year's team simply did not. So I think, for me and Paulo's last full show, most of the themes as far as offense and defense held. The final game obviously was Reed Sheppard and mostly third stringers, just 8 guys available, period. The second to last game against the Pelicans, a neutral site game in Birmingham, that was the one that Ime referred to as the dress rehearsal, and that was the one where Steven got the start. So as far as Reed versus Steven, Reed got 3 starts in the preseason, but you have to put an asterisk on the third start in that pretty much all the veterans sat out. And then even though when you look at the first 3, Reed started twice, Steven started once. Well, one of Steven's non-starting games, he didn't play at all because he was unavailable. And then Steven did play and start the game that was the dress rehearsal, and he was fantastic in that game. I think the Rockets were plus 26 in his 24 minutes, something just absolutely crazy. And of course, that speaks to, the screen setting, the offensive rebounding, the presence near the rim, all the things that make Steven Adams just such a uniquely impactful presence. And so that's the debate, and I've gone back and forth. I think I'm leaning Steven simply because certainly the opener, you're going up against Chet Holmgren and Isaiah Hartenstein, so it makes sense if the Thunder do that to match up with the double big. But I also think on paper, it makes sense to err on the side of the higher floor, which is what Steven Adams provides, in that you have so much upside elsewhere in that starting 5. With Steven, he's always going to make an impact, as opposed to Reed. I mean, there's going to be moments where he's outstanding. Obviously, the numbers he put up, nearly 30 points, 7 stocks against an Atlanta team playing most of its big guns, including Trae Young, an all-star at point guard. I mean, yeah, he's going to be really good some games, but there's also ones like the first game against the Hawks where he wasn't that impactful. And so bringing that type of player off the bench to where you aren't necessarily committed or as committed to a high minutes total, I think it gives Ime a little bit of flexibility. And I also think, I've talked about, the conundrum with Reed, and we've addressed it plenty of times on this very pod, is, how do you make him feel empowered? How do you give him the freedom that he needs to go out there and be aggressive and shoot enough at volume, especially from 3, to where his archetype is going to win out, and eventually he's going to make enough of those threes to where the efficiency is there, and he's going to get enough steals and blocks to where he's making enough plays in the defensive end to make up for the physical shortcomings and everything else that comes from being a relatively undersized guard that isn't the quickest from side to side. Well, it's not going to be easy, but as he gets more confident, look, there is a long history in the NBA. I mean, hell, you can go back to, the 80s with, Vinnie Johnson and the Pistons, but more recently, Houston examples from this century, look at guys like Eric Gordon, like Lou Williams, that sort of take on that 6-man microwave type role off the bench. And if they have it going on a given night, of course, you can ride the hot hand and play them more. And you can lean into their, need to be trigger happy because they're going up against many times second teamers, and the guys they are out there with that have already played, the sixth man is going to be fresher. So I just think that, even if I think what might be easiest for Reed on day one would be starting him and giving him the longest runway possible. At the end of the day, NBA history shows us that that's not really necessary. And so it's not about Reed, it's about the team. And in my opinion, what's best for the team is trying to make it work. Maybe not every game. There's going to be some matchups where the double big isn't conducive, or maybe Steven Adams needs a maintenance game. And I don't think you want to start Clint Capella, by the way. I thought there was a pretty clear drop off in the effectiveness of the double big when it was Steven and LP and when it was Capella and LP. I think Clint actually had the lowest net rating of any of the rotation players in the preseason. I have an article at Rockets where looking at all the big picture stats. I just think, I'm not going to say Reed will never start. And if he plays the way he did against Trae Young, then he could easily make it to where he's a starting caliber player. I think at some point, the Rockets want him to be that guy. Is it day one? In my opinion, starting Reed day one would be more about Reed individually than it would be about the team. The more I think about it, and you also look at the teams they're playing, physical opponents like the Thunder, like the Pistons, I'm leaning to starting Steven. He gives you a very high floor, trying to make it work with Reed as your high usage guy off the bench, can come in, be aggressive, maybe take advantage of some favorable matchups for him in much the same way. They weren't point guards, but in terms of being aggressive, guys like Eric Gordon and Lou Williams were for the Rockets last decade. To me, that's the easiest template for me to see working and making sense for this team. And that's not to overlook Tari, but Paulo, we were talking offline. We both agree that it just doesn't feel like starting Tari is in the cards based on his usage in the preseason, based on the context clues. The only game he started was the one where KD sat out. So I think the bottom line, there were four guys this time a month ago. There were four guys when Fred got hurt that we knew were in consideration for that fifth spot between Dorian, Tari, Reed, and Steven. Dorian's not ready. Tari, all evidence points to him being a six-man type. I think it's between Reed and Steven, and at least for week one, and I think majority of the matchups, I've come around on Steven. Paulo, what are your conclusions after watching them for four games, and where are you at as opposed to, regarding who that fifth starter, is going to be?
I'm gonna echo a lot of the same stuff that you said. I do think it's going to be Steven Adams. Um, I do think that there is merit to Tari Eason starting, but I think based off what we saw in preseason, and I know people want to say it's just preseason, but it echoes to some extent into the season. So I do think it makes the most sense for Steven Adams to start, even from a locker room management perspective. If you start Steven Adams, it's a lot easier to also give Clint Capella playing time. And if you give Clint Capella playing time early on in the season, once Dorian Finney-Smith comes back, there's less, I guess, friction as far as what if Clint has to not play at all for a 20-game stretch. I think if you play him very early on, he's eventually going to be, or at least until, if you start Steven Adams, right, Clint Capella gets more space until Dorian Finney-Smith comes back and is healthy, right? And you can buy time from managing expectations standpoint. You buy time for that period, and then eventually, and I know we don't like to talk about these things, but eventually someone's going to get hurt. Hopefully, it's not going to be anything more serious than Fred VanVleet. But guys will pick up knocks and bruises over the season, and when someone does, then you get to play Clint again, and it's easier to manage from that standpoint than if you don't play him early on and then you only start playing him, 40, 45 games into the season. So I think it even from a management of guys' personalities standpoint, and not that Clint is some kind of guy that demands anything, but it's always best to have all of your weapons kind of at least in the flow or in rhythm going into game, then I'll have a guy not play for a very large stretch of time. Beyond that, even just from the numbers don't lie. I talk about, I tweeted about it and I got really a lot of flame for it. I said that her defense didn't look good at all, and it didn't. But still, the double big lineup was where it looked the best and where the lineup data looked the best. So even from a strictly trying to win standpoint, it seems like, small sample, but it seems like that is still the way to go. And it allows you to start what was last season by far our best lineup, which was the triple big lineup. It's not just two bigs; it's Jabari at the three, which is still a lot larger of a three than it's normal. And then you also have KD at the two, so that's even bigger. So yeah, I think that's what makes the most sense. I think that's probably going to be our best lineup in the postseason. So getting reps with those guys together and building that chemistry going to be good. Steven Adams and Alperen both will always be mismatches for Chet Holmgren. He's never going to be a guy that can mess with those guys, sort of rebounding goals and even on defense. And so I think that's one of the reasons why we played so well into OKC. It's that we are able to match their physicality and sometimes even be overbearing to one of their best players like Chet. So I think even from a matchup standpoint, it makes a lot of sense. It is not the matchup to go kind of smaller with Tari, even though we're not really small. It's more it's more of a matchup where you really need to press that advantage. And then as far as Reed goes, I think he looked really impressive in the last game. But it goes to show what we've been saying for a really long time. Apparently, Reed only plays that well when he's the guy, right? And I don't think it's a flaw in his game. It might be a flaw in his kind of mental makeup, right? He knew he was the best offensive option on the team on the game against the Hawks, the last one, and he played like it, and he was deliberately looking for his own shot. And even in the games prior to that, he was still deliberately looking for his own shot, but he made what sometimes is the correct play and passed the ball along a lot more often, and it seems like that breaks his rhythm. I think if you take, if you look at just call it the first two quarters and the first half of the third, from a volume standpoint, Reed's numbers are not going to look good, but then he picked back up. We talked about it, him being sort of, it seems like volume helps it to be more efficient, which is a good trait to have, but probably not for a six man. And so playing him off the bench, like you said, really taps into that and allows him to be, perhaps the main guy on the floor, depending on how the rotations shake out. But be a lot higher in the pecking order than he would be if he's playing like next to Man Thompson, KD, and Shingun at the same time, in which those lineups is obviously more of an afterthought. So from Reed's, I think even from his development standpoint, I kind of disagree with what you said. I think even for his development, for Reed's own good, coming off the bench and having more responsibility is probably best. And so I think that's how they'll start. We'll see if how long that lasts and how long, I think signing Clint is also kind of a way for us to guarantee that we can always run the low big lineups. So as far as the guys that start and guys that come off the bench, I think that's how it goes. I do still think that from a minutes perspective, Tari Eason is the sixth man or the sixth guy that gets the most minutes, not Reed. Even though people might call Reed the sixth man because of what we typically call a sixth man as a scoring punch off the bench.
Let me clarify real quick on Reed Sheppard. I actually agree with you that for his development, it's actually best if he comes off the bench and learns a different way to succeed. What I meant was that I think in terms of giving him the best opportunity day one to put up numbers, then I think that would be as a starter because of that, maybe calling it a mental deficiency is a little bit much, but that sense of freedom that for whatever reason he seems to only have when he's the guy or closer to it in the starting lineup. So I actually do agree with you. It could be best for him in the long run to learn how to play off the bench and provide value in different constructs. It just might take a little bit of time and it might be a little bit bumpier. I think the easiest thing to do day one would be to start him, and he's clearly more comfortable in that role, but it may not be best for the team. That would be best just to help him put up numbers and just sort of play within the parameters as they are right now. Eventually, you want to expand the parameters, make him more plug and play in a number of different scenarios. And I agree with you. For developmental purposes, he needs to be able to succeed in other ways. The history of NBA guards off the bench suggests that there's no reason why he couldn't. It just may take some time. It may not be day one. One other thing before we wrap up the pod, I wanted to ask you about. So I think we're in agreement that barring injury, the day one lineup and primary rotation is going to be Amen, KD, Jabari, Alpi, and Steven, and then Reed, Tari, and Clint as three of your main guys off the bench. They could do a 10-man rotation with both Aaron Holiday and Josh Okogie. I'm actually wondering if Reed is better than we thought going into training camp. And we last recorded, we talked some about his opener in preseason, which wasn't that good. And we both agree that he looked much better the second week, especially that finale against the Hawks. If Reed is playing a lot better and he's providing value not just as a ball handler, but as a shooter. Does it maybe make sense to slide Josh Okogie ahead of Aaron Holiday a little bit? I know you were down on what Okogie did in that opener against the Hawks. He wasn't very aware off ball. I thought that improved a lot as he got more reps. Obviously, offensively, he was tremendous against the Hawks. But I also think Okogie is nice to sort of pair with Reed in that Okogie is crazy long. It's not just that he's 6'4", 6'5" as a shooting guard. He has like a 7-foot wingspan, I believe. And last year he shot 35% on threes. In the preseason, he was 40%. Aaron Holiday actually did not shoot well in the preseason at all. Now, there's no reason to think that he's fallen off on that end. I think with a larger sample size, that will be fine. But I do wonder if Reed is more ready than we had thought going into training camp. Does that perhaps slide Aaron Holiday down a little bit and perhaps make you think a little bit more about Josh Okogie? Because we've worried about the dribble penetration issue, the defense. We talked about it in previous episodes, and especially until Dorian Finney-Smith comes back, they're going to be a little light on that side of the ball. I guess you could argue for Jae'Sean Tate as well, but I think the reason I'm comparing Okogie and Holiday, they're both guards, so I think the roles, while a little different, it's not night and day different. So you could play them both. It's not crazy to have a 10-man rotation early in the year, but I guess the one thought I had to myself, and we don't have to spend long on this because this is, we're talking about maybe 5-10 minutes, the delta in terms of your end of the bench guys that are playing. But coming off that Hawks game, I am wondering if maybe Okogie plays a little bit more and Holiday plays a little bit less relative to what I thought after the first couple of preseason games. What are your thoughts there?
I'm surprised you're not giving your guy J.D. Davison a shout.
No, come on. He's fine. And, relative to a two-way slot, he's a very good signing. Don't get me wrong. But no, I don't think he's going to factor into the day one. I think that'll be the more veteran guys, Aaron, Josh, and now Jae'Sean, which, yeah, fortunately does seem like Jae'Sean is cleared and ready to go.
Yeah, to answer your actual question, I'm expecting Josh Okogie to be the guy that plays rather than Aaron Holiday. I think Aaron Holiday is okay defensively. I think Josh Okogie is a plus defensively, and I don't think the Rockets really need the extra ball handling. I actually think the Rockets may struggle to feed all the mouths they got to feed. I mean, you look at the rest of the rehearsal game, and it's going to lead you to another point I want to make. But you got the main Thompson at 20 points, you got Jabari at 26, you got KD at only 15. You got Tari Eason at 20, probably expect that to go down. You got Şengün at only 8, and I know Şengün gets really involved with the passing and being the hub and all that stuff, but when you start to think about it, the guys are taking steps up in their careers and their involvement offensively, and I think there's actually going to be a lot of mouths to feed rather than two little playmakers like we were expecting earlier on when Fred got hurt. So I do think a lower kind of, or more of a kind of more of a role player type makes more sense in the rotation, especially when he also plays better defense in Josh Okogie. So I do expect Josh Okogie to start, and don't really think that that's a hot take. And I think though I don't know if most people would think that, but the few couple of Rockets fans that I've talked about during the games, I've expected Okogie to be the guy that gets into the rotation. I want to touch on one more thing though that I feel like it's gotta be reiterated perhaps a little bit more than what it has been. Jabari Smith has taken a leap. He's not close to the same player he was last season. And if we had this Jabari Smith last season, we might have beaten the Warriors. And I know he was good against the Warriors, but as far as how intentional he is about scoring and getting to his spot and how assertive he has been, like I'm starting to think, and I've never wanted to put a ceiling on Jabari. A lot of people have said that he's a 3-and-D switchable role player. I've always thought it was really good if he could become effective at that, but I've always held on to, even though I was a Banchero guy, I've always held on to the fact that there's a little bit more there if he wants to tap into it. And it's been very little time, and obviously this is not just a reflection of the work he's put in with KD. I think that will kind of catalyze it to a higher level, but even it's just the work he put in the offseason, and we heard him talk about it, his on-ball work. I think he has gotten a lot better at basically everything. And I think that there's a world out there where he is, I think he's clearly the fourth option on the team right now. And I think in a lot of games, he's going to be the second or third highest scorer on the team. And sometimes even the highest scorer on the team. This team, up until this point, has been very selfless with the ball, especially KD. compared to what I was expecting him to be, right? Not that I was expecting him to be selfish, but more so that I was expecting him to get more ISO possessions by design from the coaching staff. We're playing so selfless that it feels like a combination of Jabari has gotten a lot better, and I don't think teams have caught up to how much better Jabari is, so they'll give him more space to try and guard the other guys, and he's being really assertive, and we'll have more chances, I guess, to punish those types of defenses and what teams are throwing out at us. Because especially when you play double big, when you match up, Jabari is going to have a mismatch. Of the guys that are going to have mismatches, Jabari's will probably be the easiest to punish because if you have a long, like, you're gonna put your biggest defender on Şengün, right? After that, you're gonna put one of your biggest defenders on Steve Adams to try and keep him off the boards. And then your best wing defender is going to be on KD more than likely, which means that one of the guards is probably going to be on Jabari, and he has to be able to punish it, and he has shown, a lot of progress in that regard. So I think a lot of people kind of have said that this is a 3-year window for the Rockets, and I've never agreed with that, even pre Jabari kind of breakout, or not really a breakout, but improvement. I think one of the ways in which you remain a top tier team post KD in a few years is with Jabari taking on that role. And when you look at it, I mean, look at the build that the Nuggets have, right? You have Şengün, Jokic, you have Amen Thompson, Jamal Murray from an offensive standpoint. And then the third guy on that Nuggets championship team and on those Nuggets contending teams is Michael Porter Jr. And I've said for a really long time that Jabari can very well be Michael Porter Jr. offensively with much better defense. So yeah, I just want to keep staking that claim that I do think that Jabari is primed to a breakout, if not this year, but as we go forward, because he's been getting a lot better at basically everything basketball. I think his defense has been kind of the same that it was last season, but offensively he's taking steps forward. And I don't want that to go unnoticed.
No, you're exactly right. And it's what he said he was working on in the offseason in his skills development, I believe, with Aaron Miller talking about getting more confident in his handle, the shot creation. When the areas he's improved at match almost exactly with what he's been telling you for months, that's when you should start to think, hey, there might be something to that. And yeah, I noticed in the Pelicans game, to your point on him drawing the weakest guard defender, the Pelicans tried to stash Jordan Poole on him, and Jabari went to work. I also think that, if they run more zone because they go double big, then, the big difference between the preseason and regular season to offset the lack of, dribble penetration stoppers, you're going to have to be a lot more active in that zone, a lot more handsy. I'm a big believer that defense translates to offense and vice versa, and that your energy on one end often leads to energy on the other. And so if Jabari is having to take on a greater defensive role, as, he's not a perimeter stopper, but he'll be asked to do a little bit more than what he was at times last season, especially with how uniquely important he is to the double big, and you're not going to ask a 37-year-old Kevin Durant to do too much, then yeah, I could see Jabari having some defense to offense type sequences. And, he may be, because of cross matches, dribbling the ball up the court, or the guy you turn to because of who the defense is trying to stash on him. So I just think for a number of reasons, I agree that what we saw in the preseason where he led the team in scoring on very good efficiency is real. My biggest macro takeaway from the preseason, and we don't have to get into this tonight, I want to wrap up, and we will in a couple of minutes, but the gravity of Kevin Durant and Alperen Şengün in the minutes they played together was just insane. Now, that was only 2 exhibitions. We'll have plenty of time to talk about that as the year progresses, but compared to last year and even compared to last preseason, I went back and looked at highlights from a couple of those games. It was night and day different. And so the non-KD, non-Şengün guys in that starting lineup, well, maybe not Steven Adams because we know what he is offensively, but Jabari and Amen, I think they're going to have opportunities that are just so much better than what they had a year ago.
By the way, before we close, did you get the invitation for KD's tree planting event next week?
Jeez, if we get busted for that, that would be hashtag Houston Sports. Anyway, on that note, we will bring this episode to a close. And if you want more insight from Paulo or myself before our next episode, go to our new Twitter page at LaunchPod790, where if you hit up the link tree in the bio, that's got all the links that you could need as far as friends, partners, sponsors of the program, Clutch fans, Sports Talk 790, USA Today's Rockets Wire, the YouTube live shows that I've been doing with Dave Hardesty after a lot of games over at Clutch Fans, but also our podcast platforms. If you haven't already subscribed, left a positive review, please do. Apple, Google, Spotify, YouTube, all those places. Again, just go to the link tree and the bio at LaunchPod790 on Twitter/X, and that's got all the links you could ever need to help support this show. And with that, we will adjourn for tonight. For Paulo Alves, I'm Ben DuBose. As always, thanks so much for listening, and please come back soon for more new episodes of the Rockets Launch Pod.